What we're going to be doing today is creating the illusion of a game. This is actually not the game, but we will be creating like a movie clip or a movie that looks as if someone is playing the game Pong. Pong is like an old, I think it's like the first video game ever created, way back in the late 70s, I believe. And it's basically like computer tennis. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is organize our layers. So we're going to need 3 layers for this. I'm going to call the first one left paddle. Second one right paddle. You'll notice, you may get this, you're not allowed to use spaces in a name for a layer, so you'll see that I've left a space here, and when I hit OK, it just fills it in with an underscore. And the last one is going to be called ball. We're going to start on the left with left palette. Now, we've talked about this in class, but just to clarify, you'll notice that this is an empty keyframe. There's nothing there right now. These are all blank keyframes because nothing exists on our stage at this point in the timeline until I do this. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to choose a color. Doesn't really matter what color. And I'm going to draw a rectangle like this. This is going to be my paddle. So I don't know, maybe around this big. I'm going to take this paddle, and notice that right now here you'll see that I don't have a stroke color. Okay, depending on the settings that you had, let me delete that, and just you probably have a stroke selected. So when you create your paddle, it'll probably have a stroke. Okay, so just be aware of that. Now, you do not need a stroke. You can keep one if you want. It doesn't matter. Just be careful that when you do, if you are going to include a stroke in your symbol to put in your library up here, just make sure that you double click the fill to select both the fill and the stroke. So notice here, I've only got the fill selected. When I go to move it, it leaves the stroke there. Just be aware of that. You need to double click for that to work. I'm going to turn this into a symbol by going convert to symbol. I'm going to make it a graphic, and I'm going to call it left paddle. Actually, I'm just going to call it paddle because we're going to use the same paddle for the left and the right. All right, so there's our paddle, and as you see, it shows up in our library. Now, I want this to be on the left side, so I can take it over here and snap it to the edge here, making sure that the snap icon is selected so that it snaps. Okay, and you can see it does that. Or a faster way to have done that is just go to the align, make sure that align to stage is selected, and I align it to the left. Okay. Now that's the left paddle. I also want a right paddle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this. And there's 2 ways I could do this. I could drag this out from here. There's probably more ways. And I could go to the right paddle layer here, and I could drag this out and place this where I want it on that paddle. But I'm actually going to undo that, edit, undo, just to show you a new way of navigating. I'm going to click on this guy here, and I can either Command C or Command V or edit, copy. And I'm going to say edit. Notice that there are 2 pastes here. There's a paste in center and paste in place. Now, when I paste it in place, it's gonna. If I put first, let's paste it in center. There, it drops it in the center of my screen, not my interface with my screen. So watch if I undo that and say I move this over here, and I go edit, paste in center. It drops it into the center of my, the monitor. Okay, so be aware of what that means. But I actually don't want that. What I want to do is I want to paste it in exactly the same place. So I'm going to go here to right paddle, and I'm going to go edit. Notice that this is empty right now, okay? And I'm going to go paste in place, and it's going to drop it exactly. So notice what happened there. Okay, it was empty a second ago, okay, and now it's got something in that position on that layer. And if I click here and drag it away, you'll see that I'm moving this right paddle to show that the left paddle was under it. Okay, all right, I'm going to put this over here. Okay, now if I want to say I want it to be exactly in the same position, you'll see that Flash does this. It gives me like this little align tool that helps me just keep it straight. If I hold Shift while I'm doing that, oops, let's undo that. If I align it here and then hold Shift, it'll constrain it to that position. Okay, and of course there are lots of ways to do this. You could have selected them both and aligned them to my stage so that they're centered. And then I could have taken this one and aligned it center and to the right. Lots of ways to do this sort of thing. Okay, so this is going to be the first page in our 20-page flip book or 30-page or whatever it's going to be, and then we're going to have some more pages that we add here. Notice that I've got a keyframe on each of my layers. Right now an empty keyframe for my ball, which I will be adding to in a minute, but keep in mind that anytime we are animating anything in Flash, we need to make sure that items are on their own layer. So I do not have my paddles both on one layer. They have to be on separate layers. Otherwise things won't work the way you expect them to. Okay, so I'm going to have this animate over a total of 60 frames. So at the halfway point, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a keyframe for both of these. Okay, so I'm going to click here and drag through these points, and I'm going to go insert keyframe. And what's going to happen is it's going to put a frame here. It's going to extend what was here through all of these frames, and on the 30th frame there will be a new copy of this on each of my layers. Okay, so notice if I go back to this one and I move this up here, I'm moving this instance, and that continues all the way through to this point, to the 29th frame. Okay, so I clicked here and I moved this purple left paddle up to the top, and it stays there all the way up until the 29th frame, and then notice here it snaps back down because this is a new instance on a new keyframe. We created that and then moved it. Okay, so be aware of that. I'm going to drag this instance, okay, on our 30th frame. I'm going to drag it down to say here, okay, and you'll see now that it goes from this point at the very top for 29 frames, and then it snaps down to here. Now I don't want it to snap. What I want it to do is I want it to smoothly animate from the top to the bottom. So I'm going to click anywhere along here in between, right click, and say create classic tween. Okay, and so now what you'll see is it animates down to this position. Okay, now keep in mind you need to do these things in the same order I'm doing. If I did this without turning it into a symbol, or I didn't create this first, none of this will work. You've got to follow these instructions pretty much exactly as they've been done in the tutorial to make sure you're following along. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing here. So on my right paddle, which is this guy over here, okay, I'm going to start him maybe around there, and it's going to stay there throughout the 29 frames, and then on the 30th frame it snaps back down to the middle. So I'm going to click here, I'm going to drag this down to say here, okay, and then I'm again going to add the animation in between by going create classic tween. Okay, so here's our two paddles. Now they're kind of moving roughly in sync. I might move this one down a little bit, and maybe I'll move this one up a little so they're not so completely in sync, but that's what we're looking at right there. Okay, that's the animation of our paddles. Now we need to create a ball, so let's go to our oval tool. We'll create a different color ball just to make it interesting. I'm going to hold shift while I'm drawing my circle to make sure that the ball stays circular, and then I'm going to go to my selection tool, double click that fill, right click, convert to symbol, and turn that into a ball. It can be a graphic, you can name it whatever you want, but ball makes sense as a name. Hit OK. I'm going to snap this, so notice that we are working in the first frame. Okay, so this is where we want to be, and we're going to eventually put it over here as well, but let's start over here. I want this to be at a recognizable point, so I'm going to stick it right against here. I'm actually going to zoom in just a little because I find that that's a bit close. So what I might do is, because of this stroke, I might just use my arrow keys and just move this over a couple pixels so that it looks like it just touches and then bounces. Okay, so that's going to be the starting position. Double click my magnifying glass to zoom out. Okay, or you can hit Command 1 if you want. Spacebar on my keyboard to reposition. And I'm going to add this guy here, the ball, on the last frame as well, down to here. Okay, so I'm going to go here, right click, insert keyframe. Because I've made it a symbol already, it continues the symbol all the way through and puts a new keyframe here. I'm going to take this guy and drag him over to here. Now notice I'm doing that in this position, on this frame. From 29 all the way to 1, these are the same as they were because I haven't added in that tween yet. Okay, this is where the change happens. Again, I'm going to zoom in, Z on my keyboard. I'm going to zoom in. I'm just going to use my arrow key just to move just a little bit over to there. Okay? You don't have to do that, but I feel like it looks a bit nicer. All right, so there's my snap into position, and now I'm just going to right click anywhere between and say create classic tween. And so now what you can see is it's going to animate between these. Now notice that if I run this movie, it's going to start at frame 1, go to frame 30, and then it's going to loop. That's not what we want, right? If I run this, okay, here's what it looks like. That's not what we're going for. We want this to look as if it's continuous. So I'm going to make a little modification here. What I want to happen is I want this to go to frame 30, and then I want to animate another 30 frames of essentially the opposite, where this is going to animate back to this position, right? So I know that this is 30, so I assume that I can make this another 30. So notice what I can do here is I can click through and select more than one frame, which is what I'm going to do. But be aware that once I've got something selected, notice what happens if I go to move this. I'm actually moving those frames, and even though there's nothing there, Flash says, "Oh, you're moving something." That means you probably want something there. So watch what happens when I let go of my mouse. It puts some frames here, which is actually not what I wanted to do. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. Command Z. Okay, just be aware that if you want to select something, you've got to click away from it first and then select. If I've got it selected and move it, it's doing something a bit more specific. Okay, all right, so I want to click and drag through here. Okay, and then I'm going to go right click, insert keyframe, and it's going to, and that's a little different than what we just saw, because notice we have keyframes here, not just frames. Okay, and so this guy, the ball, will continue to exist at the same position, and then there's a new keyframe here. Same thing here with a new keyframe here, and these are essentially the same thing that we did previously, except it's pushed frame 30 to frame 60. Now, what I want to happen is I want this, let's animate and see what happens. If I just drag through these, all three of them, okay, I can click and drag through all of them. And notice again, the same thing. If I go to move these, watch what's going to happen. It just created keyframes in this position. I don't want that. Okay, so be aware of that. Okay, edit, undo. Okay, make sure that if you are trying to select something, you click away from it and then make your selection. Okay, instead of doing something like that, which created some keyframes I don't want. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag through here, and then I'm going to right click and say create classic tween. All right, so now what happens is we start here, and this works the way we wanted it to, but then this is not seemingly not doing anything. In fact, it is, but it's just animating this frame to this frame, and this is the exact same position, so it just doesn't look like it's moving. But if this were in a different position, say I move this now up here, you'll notice that that animates between those two positions, right? It's not what we want, but you get the idea. Okay, so by changing the position here, we end up animating between those two positions. Okay, now actually what I want to do is I want this to loop. So when I get to this frame, I want it to go back to this frame. And to have that seamless, kind of look as if it's looping, I need the position of the ball here and the left and the right paddle on that last frame to match exactly what is here. So I'm going to click here and delete on my keyboard, delete this, and delete this. Now what you'll notice is that empties these keyframes out. Okay, so there's nothing in these keyframes. You can see that they're empty versus these guys which have that black fill. Tells you that there's something there. There's nothing here, okay? And you can obviously see that on my stage. And it also says, hey, what's going on here? There's a problem. You see that that is a dashed line. That's Flash saying something's not working the way that Flash expects it to work. And what's happening is it's trying to animate from this position to nothing. And it says, I can't do that. That's impossible. Something's wrong. And so you get this dashed line. But the animation stays intact. It's still trying to do that shape tween, or that classic tween that was there. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to give it something to animate to. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to frame 1. Then I'm going to click here. I'm going to right click and copy this ball. And then I'm going to go to my last frame here. And I'm going to right click and say paste in place. And what's going to happen is if you watch here, there's nothing there right now. But when I paste in place, it's going to stick that ball that was here on frame 1. It's going to stick it in exactly the same position on this frame. And you can see that this is no longer empty. It's actually full. There's something there. And the dotted line is turned back to my solid arrow. Okay, so what happens now is this position and this position are identical, so that when it starts over, it's going to loop back to here. Now you notice I have to do obviously the same thing with the paddles, because the paddles disappear here and here. That's an easy fix. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to right click my right paddle. I'm going to copy. I'm going to go to this last frame of the animation, right click, paste in place. It sticks it right there on my 60th frame. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Click here, copy, go to my end, right click in my frame, in my stage, paste in place. And you can see now all my arrows are back. They're no longer dotted, and there is something in the last of each of my keyframes that matches exactly positionally the first frame. And now my animation looks like this. Now this is probably the most boring game of Pong ever, but it is an animation and it does loop and it does exactly what we hope it would do. You can make this possibly a bit more exciting by slowing things down or making it, you could add more frames in here by continuing this game on, through more frames. That would be a simple thing to do. You could also change it so that, this guy here doesn't change until the last minute. So let's say I added a keyframe here and I went insert keyframe here, okay, and I copied this position here, copy, and I'm going to delete from here and then paste in place the one I just copied, which is here. So now it's going to animate to here. It remains at this position until that point and it moves up kind of later. Same thing with this guy. I'm going to do this guy so this is the left panel here. I'm going to insert a keyframe here, okay, and I'm going to delete this position. I'm going to copy this position, copy over here, and I'm going to paste in place. That's going to put this position right here. It's going to animate through without moving until the very last second, and this is going to jump up and stop in time, which makes it a much more interesting animation. Pauses and jumps up just in time. Is he going to get it? Oh, he made it. Is he going to get it? Oh, he made it. Is he going to get it? Oh, I didn't think he was going to get that one. Actually, I did. All right, so you get the idea. It's pretty straightforward. I think you guys can handle that. So go through. If you need to watch the tutorial a couple times, feel free to do that. When you're done, File, Save As, and save this in your named folder on your desktop. And that's it. Well done.